Welcome to Shop Talk Live, episode number 232. Got a really fun show for you today. We basically just hand it over to Mike Mascelli, and if I'm honest, he takes control of the show at some point, and I'm okay with that because he's Mike Mascelli. He kind of gets to do what he wants to do. For those who don't know, Mike is a fantastic furniture finisher, just a wealth of information about all things finishing. He's been an upholsterer for 50 years. Mike's got a bag of tricks that seems endless, and it's really fun to have him on the show. We do a one-on-one episode, and he just kind of answers a mess of furniture, finishing, and upholstery questions. And it's really good timing for us to have a finishing-centric show because we just released our newest project guide on finishing. For those of you who haven't tooled around this section of the website, you can find it on the homepage. The project guides are guided tours of our favorite articles, videos, and blogs on a given subject. Finishing is our second project guide. Our first project guide was shop projects. So head on over to findwoodworking.com and check out our newest finishing project guide. It's a really, really great way of diving deep into a subject. And we've got more project guides coming your way. We're working on them right now. All right, that's enough about the project guides. Ben, leave it alone. On with the show. So we are here with Mike Mascelli. It is always a pleasure to do anything with you, Mike. And he's drinking coffee. He's not saying hi. He's drinking coffee. And that is fine. I totally understand.
Hi, Ben. Are we on the air?
Yes, we are on the air.
All right.
Well, let's get this out of the way. It is Mike Mascelli, not
yes.
Mike.
And thank you for it's so much of a pleasure to have an Italian. In really good Italian, my name is M-A-S-C. And S-C in Italian has the H sound. So I have an invisible H in my name. It's Mascelli. But believe me, I can't tell you how many different pronunciations, and you do get used to it after a while, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I don't think that your name gets argued about your name is the second most argued about in the office.
Oh, Chris?
No, Taya Fred.
Oh, Tay Fred. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Well, that one conversation with Chris Schwartz because everybody wants to put another letter in his name.
Yeah, but I think that everyone who mispronounces Chris Schwartz's name knows they're mispronouncing it at least.
Well,
yeah,
maybe, I don't know.
I think your name, no one's aware until right now.
All right, you did it, man. You're the man.
That said, I'm pretty sure I still mispronounced Christian Becksford's name. Becksford. Sorry.
All right, so
but we're buds. All right, so we were going to do this with Bob at Bob's, and stuff happened, as is likely to happen these days.
Yep.
And so it's you and me, Mike.
Wow, Ben.
Mano a mano. And we're going to talk a lot about finishing, some about upholstery, some about randomness. These one-on-one episodes, we tend to fly through questions, so we've got a lot prepared. Hopefully this show lives up to the hype I'm giving it currently. But first off, we need to acknowledge the passing of the great Phil Lowe.
Oh my goodness, Ben! What a sad day. I developed a very great relationship with Phil over the years, and for those listening, if you ever had the privilege of being at FIM, you probably met Phil and his partner in crime, Artie Keenan. And I have stayed in touch with Artie all through the time that Phil has been sick. And it was Artie that let me know that Phil had actually passed away. Mm-hmm. It's just a milestone. I put something on Instagram. Phil also had some wonderful partnerships with lots of folks, including an upholsterer called Joe Karagajian, who is exactly 20 years my senior, a person I look up to immensely, a guy in 60 years in the business, in his 80s, still doing upholstery every day. So I had always said to Phil quietly, I would love to work, with you at the school, but I don't want to do it until Joe retires.
Yeah.
So I would go over and help Joe from time to time. And then as fate would have it, Phil got sick and that was the end of that. And now I understand Joe's not doing too well either. So it's just a passing of an era. It's just really a sad, sad time. And I can't imagine the breadth of the legacy of Phil Lowe. It's everywhere in woodworking. Phil touched a lot of people.
It feels like, you know how in the NFL there are coaching trees?
Yep.
You know, it's like the, you know, Parcells and Belichick and whatever.
Yep.
I feel like Phil was, if you trace back everybody's,
oh my God,
everybody's woodworking teaching trees, Phil really, it all leads back to Phil at some point.
You want a Phil story? One story?
Yeah, give us a good Phil story.
One story. As some of your listeners may know, coming up soon, we were going to do this with Bob Van Dyke. Bob and I are doing a program for the Working Wood Conference at Colonial Williamsburg, which would have been this coming weekend live. We're going to do it virtually. So a bunch of years ago, one of the presenters at that conference in Williamsburg on stage was Phil Lowe. So for those of you who haven't met Phil, he's not a particularly tall person, sort of a 5'2" kind of guy, and a diminutive guy. And they bring out onto the stage this ginormous great wheel lathe. How they even got it on the stage, I don't know. This thing is bigger than a grand piano. So here's this little guy. So there's 400 or 500 people in the audience. Here's this little guy, Phil, with this giant chisel and this huge lathe. Well, the lathe requires somebody to turn it.
Okay.
There's a big handle on the side.
It's like a hand crank?
Hand crank. This is why apprentices look like you, Ben. Okay? We need sturdy lads. Okay. So here's Phil. He goes up. He looks in the audience. He says, "Well, I need a volunteer from the audience to turn the big lathe." So sure enough, some big sturdy lad comes up on stage. "Oh yeah, Phil, I'll do it." So he goes, and here's Phil. And Phil. And I think everybody who knew Phil will tell you this. I don't know anybody I ever saw at a lathe that was more magical than Phil. It was like watching somebody play Bach. He could just do anything on a lathe. So here's Phil. He's turning the thing. He's talking to the people. And this guy's going. So after about 6 minutes, he wears that guy out. The guy's dying. So he goes back in the audience. He brings up another person. He wears out that person. And he's going along and he's turning the spindle, whatever he's doing. Well, after he wore out about 4 of these teenage kids, finally, a young lady comes up who was not particularly much bigger than Phil, young gal, and she comes up and she killed it. She was that turned out to be the great rapport between Phil and this young gal, who I never did get her name. But Phil always told that story that he wore out 5 guys until he finally got a girl that could turn the lathe.
Phil, the only time I ever spent with Phil was at like Lee Nielsen open houses.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And it was always you'd be talking to somebody and they'd see him on the other side of the room. They go,
"Oh, that's Phil Lowe.
That's Phil Lowe. Phil Lowe's right there. Phil Lowe's there. Phil Lowe." And it's like, yeah, man, go talk to him. And it was he was so approachable.
Yeah,
with such a presence.
Yeah, yeah. We used to do those shows in Saratoga, that Showcase Woodworkers show every year. Phil would come up, usually with Artie, and stay with us. And we always had a good time, the Sappham guys and Phil and all that stuff. But I will dearly miss Phil, and it's a great legacy. And for those that have the opportunity, Fine Woodworking Collection includes a tremendous amount of Phil. So if you have the ability to go on your subscription and look up stuff in the magazines or in the videos, do it. It's wonderful stuff.
Yeah, and we are by the time that this comes out, we'll have posted. We've been collecting remembrances from a lot of people over the past few days, and they will be going up along with links to a lot of Phil's articles and videos and his workbench video workshop. I advertised it as in front of the paywall, and unfortunately when I did that, it was not. It is fixed now. If anyone was annoyed at me for saying it was free and it's not free, it is free right now though. But, yeah. So, all right. So let's answer some questions.
Sure.
All right. Normally I don't read last names, but this one I'm going to, because this question is from Chip Stoltzfus, and Chip, if you have anything to do with Stoltzfus's restaurant in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania.
Oh, Amish country.
I miss that place dearly. All right. I have been a professional woodworker for almost 25 years. I started out in a large shop making church furniture and have since worked mostly in smaller cabinet shops. In that time, every finisher I've ever worked with has said that you shouldn't sand higher than 120 or 150 grit. They claimed once you get higher than 150, it polishes the wood and will not let stain adhere like it is designed. Yet I often hear you talking about sanding to 320 or higher before finishing. All of the shops I've worked with have used wiping stains with some type of lacquer top coat. Is the difference in sanding due to different finishes? I've started using Rubio Monocoat, and I've noticed that it gives a smoother finish if the piece is sanded to the higher grits. Thank you for your time and great work with the pod. So,
well, hi, Chip.
I've heard this many times.
Thank you for asking. A couple of things that I think we should just sort of get on the table. It matters a lot what kind of wood you're working with. More so even than the finish. So if you're working in oak or mahogany, a really open grain porous wood, particularly oak, you can get away with a lot of stuff on coarse grit sanding because you have such deep pores and lines in the grain of the wood as it is. If you're in maple or you're in cherry, it's a very different game. So you have you're talking about church furniture. A lot of that furniture is oak.
Yeah.
In a production shop setting, you're going to sand this stuff with a production machine, maybe a big stir machine, a dual pad sander, and you're going to get this stuff out the door because you're in a commercial setting. So sanding to a 120 or 150, you're leaving fairly significant scratches. So in oak, if you sand neatly along the grain, those scratches won't be as objectionable. If you're using a wiping stain product, I'm holding this up for the folks that can't see this. This is a Mohawk wiping stain product that's pretty typical that you'd see in a commercial shop. And this is mostly a dye product. It doesn't have a lot of pigment in it. Okay. So again, I did a article which will be coming out in Fine Woodworking here soon about dye and pigment. But dye, think about dye like a strong food coloring or a tea. It's going to penetrate into the wood as much as it can, whatever the wood will absorb, and that's what you get. A pigment is nicely ground fine particles of nice dirt. So the pigment, if you had it in a wiping stain product or a commercial setting, if you're going to put dye on, it's going to absorb what it's going to absorb, and that 120 grit sanded surface is going to absorb dye, and the grooves of the sanding scratches are going to absorb a little bit more dye because you have the sides of the valley, if you will, open. If you have a pigment in your stain mix, if you have deep scratches like 120 scratches, the pigment is going to lodge in those scratches. So what we always say in the shops are, if you sand at 120 and use a pigment stain, and you sand at a higher grit, the 120 grit is going to appear darker because more pigment is going to stay behind if you do a wipe off or if you leave it there because there's more places for the pigment to lodge.
There's more surface area.
Right. There's all these valleys of the sand scratches. The pigment's going to go in there and it's going to stay. So if you take the exact same piece of lumber and sand it at 120 and sand it at 220 and stain it, it's going to look darker at 120.
Okay.
Than it is at 220. So that's one aspect of the higher grit sanding. As far as this business about polishing the wood, if you sand up high enough, if you take a piece of maple or cherry and you sand it up to 400, 500, 600, you'll create a surface that's almost like this piece of plexiglass. It's very, very resistant to anything, even the dyes. So it really is true. If you sand up too far, you will resist the action of the dye penetrating. And then, of course, there's no place for the pigment to lodge. So it's going to look very, very light. So to what I always say as a rule of thumb is the middle ground here is 220.
Okay.
And there's two reasons for the 220. One's for the color and one's for the finish. On the color side, if you're sanding at 80 and then 120 and 150, whatever it is, if you don't sand perfectly each grit progressively, you're going to leave 100 grit scratch someplace. So if you sand at 220 neatly, even if you leave 100 grit or 150 grit scratch somewhere in that pattern, it won't be as noticeable because the 220 will help smooth that over. The other reason for the 220 on the finish side is if you leave 220 grit scratches, most finishes at 2 applications, a couple of dry mills of finish, most finishes will bridge 220 scratches. At 120, you got to put a whole lot of finish on there to get it to bridge the valleys. And in the case of church furniture, it didn't matter. If it's oak, you're not going for a full pour piano type finish. So it's okay. You can leave them at 120. It doesn't make the finish grab any better. You need a little bit of tooth for like the modern urethanes and stuff, even this Rubio. Other than lacquers, which melt into each other, you need a little bit of tooth. And usually in between the coats is when we would sand at 320.
Okay.
So the bare wood prep would be bring it up through the grits as you need to, up to about 220 as a rule of thumb, in most woods. And then in between your coats of finish, if you're going to scuff in between, that would be at, say, 320 at the most. If you go too much, then it's true your finish isn't going to adhere.
Also, if you do test boards, sanding at 220, your staining will look differently if you finish at 180 or 120 or whatever.
There's no question.
Right?
There's no question. Particularly again, if the colorant, I won't call it the stain is sort of an overarching term. If the color delivery system includes some pigment, those pigment particles, that powdered dirt, is going to lodge in those in the pores of the wood and in your scratches. And the other thing is, if you're going to sand rough, if you're going to leave it at 120 or 150, you better sand really, really neatly with the grain, because anything cross grain is going to show up like a scar.
So especially little pigtail swirls from a random orbit sander.
And again, let me give you some advice on that. If you're sanding up to 220 with a random orbit, even really good ones, there's air powered ones and there's electric ones. Even a really good 220 random orbit, you're going to get little swirly marks. You can hand sand those out, but you got to back up to 180.
Okay.
You want to get those swirly marks out, back up to 180 on a hand block, get the swirlies out, and then hand block at 220. So use your random orbit to get most of the work done, and then try to minimize the swirly marks. But if you get those little swirls, you got to sand them out. You got to back up one grit.
I've recently started doing Christian Becksfort's method of, I think, come 150 or so, he pulls the pad off the random orbit, does a hand pass.
Yep.
Then 180 random orbit, pulls that pad off, does a hand pass.
Yep.
Is that extra work?
If you're trying to clear the swirlies out.
Okay.
The other thing that can help is a lot of these random orbits now, the new ones, the electrics, are adjustable speed, variable speed.
Okay.
And
are you supposed to change that speed? I've never touched that knob.
Where do you run it? High, fast, or slow?
Whatever I have no idea. I've never thought about that knob.
Well, if you put the knob all the way fast, you're going to remove a lot more material and you're going to leave more swirly marks. If you put it all the way slow, it's going to go and you're not going to get good sanding action. So somewhere in the middle is better and slower is better. So I would say sand at the slowest speed that's effective for what you're trying to do.
Okay.
You will minimize the swirly marks. If you sand it at full, number 10, you're not only not going to have as much control of what you're sanding, but you're going to leave more swirlies.
All right. Now that we're on like this discussion of knobs that I never mess with, I'm fancy and have a Festool vacuum.
Oh,
I know. I know. Thanks to Bargain Hunt in Nashville.
Okay.
I love that place. They used to buy like truckloads of Amazon returns.
Nice.
And then sell them at like 60%. Oh, I bought a lot of Festool there. Yeah. So I know that there is a knob for the amount of suction on my vacuum. Mm-hmm. And I know that some people mess with that when they're sanding. Does that play into?
Well, again, Ben, I think the critical element here, you have to always back up to what you're on. If you're sanding pine, it's different than if you're sanding maple.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
So if you're sanding pine, you may have to max out that vac because it's kicking up some serious dust. Pine at 80 grit is going to make a mess.
Okay.
Maple at 220, it's very, very different. So it's like anything else. Adjust your speed of your machine, of your sanding pad, to the most effective for what you're doing, the least the better, and adjust your suction to work with what you're trying to do, depending on what the wood is. But you shouldn't be using a random orbit for large removal of stock. It's not the most efficient way to take off a whole bunch of wood. It really isn't.
Belt sander?
Well, you've got to, you could, I'd love to see, stuff that's machined or hand planed as close as possible. So you're not going to take off 1/4 inch of lumber with a sander.
Yeah.
You're going to get better surfaces with a hand tool or planer or, whatever you're going to use, scraper or whatever. So the sander can be your friend. And I would not recommend random orbit sanding in between coats of finish. It's just too aggressive.
Okay.
That's a hand sanding process.
Okay, so go up to 220.
As a rule of thumb, I would say that's the average.
All right.
Hey, Chip, I hope we answered your question.
If not, we answered other questions, my questions specifically. All right. Okay. So let's see. Wait, hang on. No, let's go back to Chip's question again.
Oh man, you're killing me.
I'm sorry. No, I'm thorough. I'm thorough, man.
All right, fine.
We used to answer like 7 questions on this show, and I took over. It's like 1 to 4 at best.
Come on.
All right. If you are not staining, if you're not adding any colorant,
okay,
what are you sanding to? Again, I know it's dependent upon many variables, but
okay. So if you sand maple at 220, and you put on a single thin coat of shellac, you're going to see sand scratches.
Okay.
Okay. A single very thin coat of anything, whether it's lacquer, shellac, varnish, if it's really thin, the one application of stain is not going to leave behind enough film to mask over those scratch marks. So 220 is an average number. If you're sanding at 220 and you're going to put 3 or 4 coats of polyurethane on, you'll never see the scratches.
Okay.
If you're sanding at 220 and you're putting on a very thin wash coat of shellac, you're going to go, oh, it looks scratchy. So it really depends on what your result is. So if you're going to do let's say a maple, unstained maple, you sand it at 220, you put your shellac on, okay, fine, it covers up a little bit, scuff it at 320, put another coat of shellac on, then the shellac will probably fill the 320s at the next coat, and then you're going to look good.
Okay.
So it's sort of a progressive process. But just think about those sand scratches as deep valleys. Whatever you put on is going to go in the valley, and then you're not going to see it, until that valley gets filled in. If you want to have a pretty, smooth surface. The other thing people do is let's say you put your 1 or 2 thin coats of shellac on, if you add some paste wax, the paste wax will fill in the valleys and the scratches and give you some feel and some sheen and some, help smooth out that effect. So that's. A lot of folks will say, well, gee, I use shellac and then I just rub with steel wool and paste wax. That's a very effective method because the wax is so thick, it fills in those scratches.
Okay. All right. Now.
All
right, let's see. Question number 2 is from David.
Hi, David.
I have a problem getting denatured alcohol from my shellac. I presently use methyl hydrate. I'm not sure if this is appropriate or good. What should David be doing? David might be in California. I don't know.
Ben, I kind of think David's in Canada or maybe England. Okay? And for those of you that...
denatured alcohol is dang hard to get in California.
Possibly. What he's referencing is a product called methyl hydrate. So for those of you that can't see me, I'm holding up my fingers and I'm making a cross. David, methyl hydrate is not your friend.
Okay.
So let me try to explain a little basic chemistry here. There's a number of ways to get alcohol. The alcohol family contains many cousins. The cousin that we're most familiar with is ethanol, which is usually distilled from grain, corn, or whatever it is, and that we know as either moonshine or booze. Okay, so ethanol is drinkable. It's grain alcohol. The reason that ethanol is put up in a formulation called denatured alcohol is to avoid the taxes that are placed on drinkable liquor. So when they sell utility alcohol at Home Depot or in the home center, they're putting something in it to make it so you can't drink it. And what they're putting in is poison. It's a toxin, and guess what the toxin is? Methanol. So methyl hydrate is another name for pure methanol. It's another cousin in the alcohol family. It is the poison that's put into denatured alcohol. So what David is using is not the ethanol, it's just the poison.
Oh.
And believe me, if you spend enough time breathing the fumes of methyl hydrate, you're going to get one heck of a headache. And you're also going to be ingesting a bunch of fumes into your internal organs that you don't want.
Yeah.
Methyl hydrate is not your friend, David. I know in Canada and in England, the actual product on the shelf is labeled as methyl hydrate.
Okay.
Where we would use a trade name, methanol carbinol is another name. There's a bunch of names, but we used to call this wood alcohol. It doesn't come from grain. It's toxic in all forms. It's toxic on your skin. It's toxic to breathe. It's toxic to ingest. So my suggestion, David, if you can do it, is go to the liquor store, wherever you are, and try to buy grain-neutral spirit like Everclear.
Mm-hmm.
So it's booze. It's drinkable alcohol. It's a little bit more expensive. It works wonderfully for shellac. And it's not, if you breathe enough of it, you might get a little buzz because it's alcohol. But you don't have that denaturant. I recommend this to all of my students. Even hardware store denatured alcohol, unfortunately, also can be reprocessed industrial solvent. So it isn't necessarily virgin alcohol.
Ooh, okay.
So, Sunnyside is one of the better ones. But some of the denatured alcohol in the home center is junk when they start. And then they put poison in it.
Huh.
So the ideal situation, if you can do it, is to buy either a proprietary shellac solvent like Baycol from Mohawk or Balin's, or buy grain alcohol, straight up grain alcohol, which we buy here in the States as Everclear. And I don't know, David, if you're in Canada, if you can even buy spirit alcohol. But if you're going to use methyl hydrate, lots and lots of ventilation, and try not to use it, in a confined area. You're going to get a good buzz and a serious headache.
I know that some people have reported being able to buy denatured alcohol or Baycol in paint supply stores. So if you are in an area that you are having a hard time going to a home center and buying your shellac solvent, try going to a specific supplier of paint supplies.
That's a good suggestion, Ben. I'll just give you a little footnote on that. For many, many years, the preferred way to remove paint and varnish was a product we would call stripper in the trade, but the main chemical in there is something called methylene chloride. It's now extraordinarily regulated. You can't buy methylene chloride strippers at the home center anymore, but there are industrial suppliers like some of the Sherwin-Williams commercial paint stores where you can buy industrial chemical like denatured alcohol, but you got to buy 5 gallons.
And
so
now you're on a list.
Find it in a quart or a gallon, you might have to buy a pail.
Yeah.
So that's a good suggestion. And a commercial supply like a Sherwin-Williams chem store might be a place to get denatured alcohol if they'll sell it to you in a pail.
Okay.
Which will last you a long, long time.
Yeah.
So the methyl hydrate, you just got to really respect it and understand what it is. It's poison.
Okay. And here's one of my dumb questions that I should know the answer to. What is MEK?
MEK is methyl ethyl ketone. And I have a little thing I do when I teach where I talk about the solvents from the mildest to the strongest.
Okay.
You start up here with ammonia or maybe rubbing alcohol, which is diluted isopropyl. Rubbing alcohol is, very, very mild solvent. When you get all the way to the top of what's the nastiest stuff, one click up from the top is MEK.
Okay.
MEK is extraordinarily powerful industrial solvent. It's basically epoxy thinner, polyester thinner. It's used for fiberglass work, for those 2-part floor finishes.
Okay.
MEK, it needs huge respect. It usually needs supplied air respirator, big time ventilation. MEK is not to be messed with. It is serious business.
Okay. Wow. Okay. We're going to have to
do MEK. So it's the same thing as sanding. My advice to anybody is let's use the least aggressive solvent that'll do the job.
Yeah.
If you're doing something to clean the grunge off the back of your kitchen chairs, start with Windex. It's just ammonia with a little blue water in it. And if that does the job, great. If it doesn't, well, okay, let's move up one click. Let's go to rubbing alcohol. Well, that's not working. Well, let's go to denatured alcohol. It's a little bit more, it's got ethanol, it's a little more powerful. And then go down through the chain, and don't be jumping all the way to lacquer thinner or MEK if you can do the job with alcohol or ammonia.
Yeah. Whew. All right.
Yeah, when you get down above naphtha into lacquer thinner, MEK and MAK and all those big solvents, it's serious business. You got to know what you're doing.
This is something that I am just starting to really think about the more. Good. And maybe it's the fact that, I have a kid around and blah, blah, blah. Good. But, or maybe it's the fact that I'm working on guitars now and find myself reaching for solvents a little bit more often than I used to. The harshest thing that as a furniture maker I ever dealt with was polyurethane or shellac, and it's solvents thereof. But
just keep this in mind. In the instrument world, luthier world, the primary finishes forever have been lacquer based.
Yeah.
And usually there's a blend called lacquer thinner, which you use to work with those products. And the primary component of lacquer thinner has always been acetone. And now, particularly in California and some other places, all the other solvents that they use to kick that up are being regulated out. So it's more and more acetone and less of anything else. But remember, lacquer thinner is a blend, and some of the stuff that's in it is pretty powerful stuff, and they don't tell you what the proportions are.
Yeah.
So you can buy straight up acetone at most of the home centers, and if that'll do what you need it to do, stay with that.
Well, I think what I was getting to is that I have a shelf full of stuff that I don't fully understand is on. Okay. I
think you're not alone in that. Then.
Yeah, I'm. That's why I'm vocalizing it. Otherwise, I would do it off air with you.
Okay,
but it's definitely something that you need to think about.
It is
what you have on the shelf, how you are protecting yourself when you're using it.
Yes.
Yeah. So
I really feel strongly that the protections on the labeling of denatured alcohol, which I could probably grab a can here if I turn around, they're really inadequate to really. You got one? What's that? Sunny Side?
Yeah.
Does it say it's hazardous to breathe and get on your skin and all that stuff?
Let's see. Danger, poison, flammable, liquid, and vapor. Vapors may cause flash fire.
There you go.
May be fatal or cause blindness if swallowed. Vapor is harmful, eye irritant. And that's on the front, and not too small, but I'm also of the belief that there's so many, I don't know, this could go south real quick, but there's so many warning signs that sometimes you don't take them seriously.
Exactly.
Signs.
And just a last little footnote. Are you familiar with the product called Sterno?
Yeah.
Canned heat? Mm-hmm. Canned heat is gelled methanol.
Okay.
Very efficient, clean, beautiful flame. Okay. It's gelled poison. Yeah. And there were stories years ago of alcoholics who were desperate for any kind of alcohol that would try to drink Sterno and go blind.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So it's really a scary reality that what you're describing is not well advertised to the average home woodworker. However, the world is turning, I think, in your generation more toward the water-based products. And that's great, but even the waterborne products have solvents in them, the glycols and the glycol ethers, that are dangerous. So you just got to be a little bit more chemistry aware here, and maybe we'll do that on another show.
Yeah. Maybe we should wander up there with some video cameras sometime.
We'll see what happens.
All right. We'll
keep on trucking, Ben. That's good.
We're good. We're good. That's fine.
Okay.
I'm not trying to set any records here.
All right.
Okay.
But now you're going to give me a softball, ladies and gentlemen. If you can see me, I did cheat. Ben sent me these questions last night, so I kind of know a little bit what's coming.
Well, okay. So this one is from Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
My wife and I bought a house, and there are several rooms that we don't have furniture for. I'd eventually like to make furniture, but I know it will take years. What's your problem, Andrew? Most of the furniture we've picked up in the past has been from antique stores and more in the mid-century style that we both refuse to go to your typical furniture store. I have an idea of what to look for in furniture, in wooden furniture, to see that it's quality, even if it's mass produced. But upholstered furniture is a black hole to me. I don't mind spending a little bit more if it means we're going to get something nice. What are you looking for in an upholstered piece of furniture?
Well, I just want to thank you, Ben, dearly for giving me a nice softball upholstery question.
Yeah, man.
Because for folks, if you don't know me, my actual trade is upholstery. That's really what I do. I got dragged into this finishing business many years ago by a whole bunch of crazy friends of mine. So I really am glad to have an upholstery question.
You just like using the big words like methyl, ethyl,
yeah,
ethyl.
Yeah, I do. Methyl ethyl ketone. Okay, so basically the furniture that's out in the stores that you can go and look at now, I think the technical term for it would be crap. Okay. What's at Raymore and Flanigan and some of the other big box furniture stores is imported. If you had the luxury of taking it apart, which I don't recommend, what this fellow Andrew was saying is true. It really is press board and air. Mm-hmm. What's in these pieces is remarkably poorly made. It's put together with sometimes not even with glue, with metal fasteners, with big staples. It's disposable furniture. The quality of the fabric is poor. The quality of the frame is worse. And the furniture is going to have a lifespan of several years. So the upholstery that covers it all up makes it very difficult to know what you're getting. So I'll give you some tips other than the obvious ones, which are you can go to a quality store like Stickley Audi. You could go to Ethan Allen. You could go to a custom maker like Shackleton Thomas up in Vermont. You know, Charlie makes beautiful furniture. Moser's. I mean, you can buy quality furniture, hardwood furniture, but it's a premium price. I mean, the price of a one Stickley chair, you could buy a 5-piece set at Raymore and Flanigan.
Yeah.
So if you do go to these places, a really easy test for a piece of furniture, let's say it's an upholstered wing chair, just grab the corner of the top of the chair or the bottom of the chair and pick it up. If you can pick it up with a couple of fingers, there's nothing in it. The chair should have some bulk. You can tell a lot just by the weight of the chair. Your grandmother's wing chair that you have to move when the Christmas tree comes in every year, it takes a sturdy lad like Ben to pick it up. That's because it's got a hardwood frame. Mm-hmm. If you can grab that chair and pick it up with a couple of fingers, there's nothing in it. It's just a bunch of lightweight frame and air. So that's the first indication that it's an inexpensive piece. If the piece has a cushion, take a look at the cushion, and most cushions are made with a zipper on the back side, so they can put the foam on the inside. If you're in the furniture store like I am, and you can be discreet, grab the cushion, open up the zipper when they're not looking, and look inside. If you look inside and all you see is foam, it's a cheap cushion. If you look inside and you see some foam wrapped with some Dacron batting, I'll get a piece here, Ben, somewhere. Oh, of course I can't put my hand on it. Doesn't matter. Like quilt batting. Mm-hmm. If you see a wrapped cushion, foam wrapped with Dacron, that's better. If you open up a cushion and you see that it's got a muslin inner cover inside of it, that's a really good one. So a very strong indication that they're better. The other thing is most of these new pieces are unsprung, or at least lightly sprung. So what they're relying on is a sort of a flexible deck, if you will, and a cushion to make it soft. So again, general rule here, not a strict rule. Generally speaking, if you see a cushion that's 5 or 6 inches thick, what it's sitting on is not a well-made piece because they're relying on that big, thick cushion to do all the work.
Okay. And that foam will wear out.
Yeah, almost instantly. Okay. Including in my kid's house. You know, my daughter-in-law had to have this big sectional couch that's the size of the Nimitz. And 3 years in with the kids, the foam is gone. So the old school cushions were 3 and 4 inches thick. That would be a typical couch cushion. Okay. If you're seeing a 5 or 6 inch thick cushion, at least raise your awareness to say, gee, what that's sitting on is probably not that great. And what it's sitting on, may well be just a tightly stretched piece of decking that might look something like Tyvek.
Yeah.
Okay, there's nothing. Now so if you take the cushion off the piece, off the couch or off the chair, and if you feel, push your hand down on the deck. If you feel, what I'm holding up, folks, is a serpentine spring. It's like what we call a zigzag or a zigger. Mm-hmm. It's a Kirby S-shaped wiggly spring. If you push your hand down on the top of that deck and you feel zigger springs, that's better. At least it's sprung. Mm-hmm. If you push your hand on the deck and there's nothing, if you can just reach over and in between there's a support board in the middle, or maybe there's a couple of support boards, and that's it. If there's nothing in there, it's like a trampoline, it's a cheap piece.
Okay, so what about webbing?
Well, the webbing would all right. So a classically upholstered piece, the webbing would be on the bottom.
Okay.
So if you reach underneath a piece of furniture at the furniture store, there's a dust cover there. And in the old days, you would reach up and you would feel the bottom of the webs. And on the bottom of the webs are where the coil springs are, real springs.
Okay. So
webs are for coil springs.
Okay, now, I'm thinking on maybe a slip seat. Have I seen red stripe webbing?
Yeah.
Okay. Without springs then?
Yeah.
Or,
you can all right, for chairs, for like occasional chairs and stuff, you would web on the top of the frame, you put some padding, and that's your seat.
Okay.
If you're doing that on a couch, if somebody's putting upholstery webbing as the deck, you're sitting on that tension webbing, that's probably better than sitting on a piece of stretched Tyvek, but not much better.
Okay.
So what these folks have done, these furniture makers, is they've taken everything out of the couch other than the absolute perimeter frame, leave nothing in the middle, I mean literally nothing, and put some stretchy material on there with 50 million staples and some really big thick cushions, and that's your couch.
Yeah.
Another indication that the piece is poorly made is if you look at the way the fabric is applied, and it's funny how the awareness is raised now and gone away. If it's a pattern with any sort of a stripe or a repeat in it, see how well it's matched. If the fabric is all mismatched on the end caps, on the front, on the back, it's an indication that the piece is not a quality piece. A well-made piece of furniture, the pattern all matches everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's just another level of mass production that you can put it out there and say, gee, I can buy 3 pieces of furniture for $7.99. And you know what? You're going to get 3 or 4 years out of them.
And sometimes that's what's needed. I've got IKEA in the living room with dreams of making the next couch, I think. We'll see.
Well, man, I teach a class out at Mark Adams every year. It's going to be in the fall this year. It's an open shop. I let people bring their own pieces, and they bring in all this stuff, and we tear it apart, and we find the most horrendous sins between the makers and the other upholsterers that worked on them before. But what I would also say to Andrew is don't rule out the possibility of buying an older piece of furniture that's got a well-made hardwood frame and having it reupholstered or doing it yourself. I mean, we do these. We take a 5-day class out at Mark Adams, and we do couches and chairs and all kinds of stuff from tearing them down to putting them back. It's great fun. It's not highly skilled. You need a little bit of coaching and some tools, but it's a wonderful process. And it may be someday we'll do that at Bob's school as well. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility of buying an older piece that's well made. Or the other thing you could do, I always find that the great teachers are old chairs. If you buy an old $10 chair at the Habitat store, bring it home and tear it apart and see how it's made, see what failed, and then you can rust up the pieces and put them in the fireplace or take it to the landfill. But it's a great education of taking apart a well-made piece of old furniture.
That's a fun idea.
It's also good therapy because you get to rip stuff apart.
So, this is interesting because normally, we don't talk about buying furniture. So this is an interesting conversation. If Andrew was interested or found a piece of furniture in the Habitat as an upholsterer, could he take a picture of it and bring it to a local upholsterer and say
Absolutely.
like, hey, what are we talking about for, because maybe it's just a few $100 or something and he winds up with like a lifelong couch.
Exactly. Ben, the furniture of previous generations was made to be reupholstered. That was the idea.
Yeah.
When you handed it down to your kids, they would put another cover on. I have a booklet that I did for the trades a while ago called 10 Questions to Ask Your Upholsterer about how to deal with getting a quality upholstery job. Maybe we can do that someday as another show. But there are a bunch of things that I'm sad to say, there are some unscrupulous upholsterers out there that, don't necessarily do everything correctly. But it's certainly a viable option to have something redone that's a quality piece.
Okay. All right. Let's take a quick break.
One of my favorite books is Mike Pekovich's The Why and How of Woodworking, a simple approach to making meaningful work. Right now, it's available for purchase in the Taunton store. Use promo code PODCAST for 30% off anything and everything.
Come on, Outlook. Where are you?
I can do it from here, Ben, if you want.
Oh, yeah. You read it then, Mike.
All right.
Handing it over.
All right. So, hello out there in Radio Land. Scott, if you're listening, once or twice a year, I go to my mother-in-law's house. We sit on wobbly stools or chairs. These stools and chairs have horizontal supports connected to the legs with a mortise and tenon type joint, which he says, in parentheses, a little hole in the leg with a dowel glued in, which is not a mortise and tenon probably. I want to be the favorite son-in-law. How do I fix these chairs? Previous attempts to reglue have failed. Well, Scott, there's a couple of considerations here, which I'll just back up briefly and talk about our forefathers and foremothers who made chairs from real wood. So folks like the Windsor chair makers would take a chair leg, or Chris Schwarz now, and the leg would be unseasoned or green lumber, so wet. The rung or the dowel or the stretcher that goes into it would be well seasoned and perfectly dry. So here's if you can't see me, I'm pointing my finger into a socket. So the finger part that is dry, the socket is wet. So as that socket leg dries, the green lumber tightens up around that thing. There's no glue. And some of those chairs have stayed together for hundreds of years. But in its working life, wood, no matter what you do to it, whether you paint it or finish it in some other way, it will absorb and release moisture forever. It's hygroscopic. It's just what it does. You can't stop it. And you can aggravate it by shifting things, particularly if, Scott, I don't know what you have in your house, but if you have hot air heat, as opposed to hot water baseboard, your dry heat in your house in the winter is going to make that house super dry, super low humidity. That wood's going to release all of its moisture, and those pieces are going to get small. It also makes a difference with the wood that the chair is made out of. If the chair is an inexpensive piece or the stool is an inexpensive piece, if those elements are pine or a soft wood, it's going to aggravate it even more. So let's say when they put this piece together in a mass production factory, the opposite occurred. Let's say the rungs were really, really green, undried, and the leg was really, really dry. They put them together. The opposite happened. The hole is bigger. So now it's going to, even from the first day it leaves the factory, the thing is slightly loose. So what some of the makers do, I don't know, Ben, I'll hold this up.
Yeah.
Here's a chair joint made with a dowel stuck into a hole, or a larger element turned to a point at the end, so there's a little dowel here. If these two elements fit together well, that's great. If you put a bunch of glue at the end grain of the part that sticks in, it's not going to do any good at all. The glue surface has to be on the edge here, and it has to be really, really clean. So for this reglue to work, you've got to get the thing apart. You got to get the glue really, really cleaned off. Either scrape it or use some vinegar if it's yellow glue, get it, or sand it, get it really, really clean, put some new glue on, and put it back in. And if you do that and it's really, really loose, chances are the glue is not going to be able to hold it. It's going to break again because of the stress of that action. It may be that the piece of furniture is just such that you're not going to resolve that. Now, a couple of old-fashioned tricks to handle this, what some of the old-timers would do was take a plane shaving from a fine, number 4, number 3 plane, curl up a nice piece of something, ash or something, and wrap that curl of the plane shaving around the part that's too skinny, make the dowel a little fatter, and then stick that in the hole so at least it's all wood. Mm-hmm. That would help. I mean, old furniture is put together with hide glue, which is very forgiving. What a lot of the commercial shops are doing now to deal with these things is the cheat that I particularly don't like is putting a brad or a nail in across the thing,
yeah,
joint, because the nail invariably will split the element, the dowel, and you're going to wind up with a further problem down the road. So it works for a little while, but it's not a long-term fix. What the commercial shop folks are doing is trying to use this new generation of adhesives that are not necessarily the same as yellow glue. The one I particularly like, and I'm using all the time now, is made by West System. There's also ones made by System 3. But the key thing here, this is an epoxy product, two-part epoxy. So you get two toothpaste tubes, you squeeze out equal parts, you mix it up. Most of the epoxies that we've used up to now have been pretty brittle. So this particular product is called G Flex. It's made by West System, and it's made for the marine industry, and this is made to work on boats. This stuff stays flexible when it's cured. It's cool. They also sell a whole series of additives. This particular one is what they call 407. There's 403, 404, 405. These are microballoon additives that you can put in. This one happens to be purple. So what I say to the folks is take this West System product, put some of this in, and make purple peanut butter. Something the consistency literally of peanut butter. It's thick, it's gooey. You put that in that hole with your loose dowel. It's going to take 12 hours or more to cure. And then you have something that's going to be a very strong adhesion and a flexible joint in the end. Of all of the glue repairs, that will probably last the longest depending on what your atmospheric conditions are and how hard the use is. If you got, teenagers that lean back on the chairs, it's going to be worse. But any of these glue repairs are subject to failure. The reality is you're going to have to re-glue chairs probably over their life. And thank goodness for that, because most of the guys in the furniture repair business make good money re-gluing chairs.
So let me ask you this. Is there any concern about being able to repair this epoxy fix further down the road, another 40, 50 years down the road? Well,
in a museum setting, we wouldn't use the epoxy because it's not reversible. I mean, in those settings, you want animal hide glue, old brown glue, or ground hide glue is the preferred glue. And I would never say to anybody, particularly if you have an older piece, if you see that crusty, it looks like brown sugar when it's over years. If you see that inside of a glue joint, that's hide glue. You can reverse it with a little hot water, and you can re-glue it with hide glue, and it's wonderful. And that's if you have older pieces. I'm assuming what Scott's got is not that. I'm assuming it's a modern piece with a modern PVA of some kind, yellow or white glue. And this epoxy solution is an alternative to continuously re-gluing. It'll just last longer because it's flexible.
Well, I feel like I'm going to take you up on this because my father used to have a tradition, it seemed like, of once a year re-gluing one of our dining room chairs for the entirety of my life. And he's not doing it anymore.
Well, for hide glue.
No, it definitely wasn't. And my theory has always been that he's not cleaning the glue off enough. And now it's probably, even if he was, we've lost enough wood in the dowel joint, and these are dowel joints.
Yep.
What I was planning on doing is assembling the chairs, clamping them, marking lines, and dominoing the joints.
Wow. Well, that's
overkill.
That's a nuclear solution. I mean, that can last forever. And folks, if they're not familiar with the domino, it's essentially a loose tenon. It's a biscuit, and when you put glue on it, it expands slightly. So that would be a great solution. I mean, there's lots of other things people used to do. You could drill a hole in the joint and squirt in some glue. But for an alternative that didn't really exist before, the flexible epoxies do have their place. And what I particularly don't like, I would not recommend, is the polyurethane glues, the Gorilla Glue, because it's not really glue. It's just an expanding foam, a sticky foam, and they don't really have a lot of place for a glue joint like that. So
the foam feels like a gap filling.
It's not.
It's not.
Too much air.
Yeah.
Too much air.
Yeah.
All right. So you want to? Well, I'm gonna. We're getting close to our time.
We're doing fine, Mike. We're doing fine. You're hosting at this point, so like You know what? I should have known this was going to happen. I'm on the mic ferry, and you take us where we're going.
Well, I don't want to keep us too much past our time.
We're good.
You sent me, I only have one more question, and it's a. Let's see who it is. It's a. There's two.
Yeah.
Well, the oak coffee table. I don't have the. It's a lady. It's Lori.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be a little shameless here, Lori. Her question is about an oak coffee table. She said, I put several coats of polyurethane. It's cured for several months. As I rubbed out the final finish in bright sunlight, you can see a fine scratch pattern. Well, Lori, I hope you're a subscriber to Fine Woodworking, because I just did a joint piece with Bob Van Dyke about rubbing out varnish.
You're even like forward promoing for me. I mean, this is like your next level podcaster. You're ready for like Gimlet Media stuff here now, man.
Shameless self-promotion here, man. That's what we're doing. What the heck?
Okay, so you have an article coming up on rubbing out.
We do.
Okay.
And it's a piece that Bob made. It's done with actually Waterlox varnish, so not polyurethane. But we have an article step by step about how to do this. And very briefly, the answers here are start out with some questions for me. And the first is, you say you rubbed it out with a fine scratch pattern. Well, how fine? You know, if you have cured polyurethane that's several months, that's good. If you're trying to rub polyurethane that's only a few days old, it's like trying to rub out Jell-O. It's just too soft. So once it's good and cured, you can rub, and I would say if you rubbed it at 220, you're going to see the scratches. I have a little demo that I usually do when I teach, which I won't do here because most of you folks can't see it. We take a piece of common plexiglass. I recommend trying this at home. Just a scrap piece of plexiglass, like picture frame plexiglass. Take a piece of 220 sandpaper and scratch it neatly, evenly on that plexiglass. Hold it up to the light, and when you do, you will see not only scratches, but you'll see almost the light not even being there, because 220 is remarkably opaque when you scratch it, even on a cured finish. So in our demonstrations that we do, we rub progressively up through the grits. So 220, 320, 400, maybe up to 1,000 grit. And sometimes we do those higher grits wet, so we lubricate with a little water, wet dry. Well, I can't show this to you, but you'll have to take my word for it. When we rub up to 1,000, it looks really, really good. In the automotive world, all the cars now have clear coat on there. And those clear coats are rubbed up to about 2,000 in abrasive. And then they switch to a polishing compound product. I'm holding up a bottle here of a commercial automotive polish, which has what we call a friable abrasive. So the abrasive in here is designed to break down. So as you polish it by hand or machine, the abrasive breaks down and you get this tremendous sheen and this fabulous appearance. So if you want a really, really nice piano type finish that's really, really deep, you got to go up at least to about 1,500 or 2,000 really progressively neatly. And if you want to go beyond that up to like Steinway piano, you got to get into some polishing compounds. So I teach this in our classes, and what's happened in my experience in the last few years is most of the folks your age, Ben, don't really want high gloss. They're looking at the lower sheens, the closer to the wood, oil type finishes. Mm-hmm. They don't want them, looking like grandma's piano or it looks like plastic. So, Lori, if you rubbed it at 220, you have a couple of options. You can try some paste wax, put some hardware store Minwax or Varathane paste wax on, let that dry really well, buff it with a soft cloth. It'll look much, much better. You won't see the scratches. Or take a little wet dry 320, wet dry 400, and very gently and nicely and evenly with a block behind you, cork block or a felt block, rub it maybe to about 400 and then see what that does. And maybe go to like, you can buy, I think, probably up to about 400 in the home center. If you want to get above 400, you probably got to go to an automotive supply like a auto parts store where you can get 600, 800, 1,000 grit. So it really depends on how far up you want to rub. But 220 scratches, you're going to see them.
Do you have any experience with micro mesh?
Micro mesh is a wonderful product. What we used in the article for Bob, and I was going to kind of save it for that, is a product called Merlon.
Okay.
These are the synthetic abrasives, which you can buy at Woodcraft and some of the other stores where they go up into nice high grits. You can buy these soft pads, the Merca pads, but you're got to get up above. If you're down in the 220, 320 range, you're going to see the scratches.
Okay, yeah.
You got to get at least 400, 500, 600, maybe more, and you have to be even and precise as you do your rubbing, because if you don't, you're going to leave a scratch from the previous grit, and you're not going to resolve it. So each grit is supposed to fully resolve the previous grit. So when you sand at 220, when you go to 320, what should be left is nothing but 320 scratches. The 320 should resolve, and you stand in the same direction each time, but you got to be really neat and precise about your pattern, about how you rub.
Look out, coming to a fine woodworking near you.
Well, All right, then. We got one more, which I didn't know we had.
Let's see, from Greg.
Yeah.
I would like to be able to use oil-based finishes, but my workshop is in the basement. In the summer months, I'll finish a project outside on the porch or in the garage, but it is not feasible in Michigan in the winter. What can you do in Michigan in the winter? Nothing, I'd say.
Well, we're in the same latitude right here, Ben, you and I.
I don't know. I finally got heat out here, so I'm sitting pretty. When I've tried using oil-based finishes in the house, even on small projects, my entire house smells. Are there any practical options?
Oh, Greg.
Shellac is your friend.
Well, yeah, it is. I live in a cold climate. I'm in upstate New York. I'm not that far from Ben, actually. I'm in a basement shop. Maybe you can see the window. If you can see it behind me there, where the fan is. Okay, I'm in a basement shop. The first question for Greg is, what kind of heating system do you have in your house? If you have a hot air vented ducted system, you're going to have whatever you're doing in the basement is going to migrate through the house in about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So you're really fighting a battle because your furnace is breathing the air from the ambient air of the basement. It's got a little filter on it for dust, but not for the fine particulates of the finish. So you're really fighting a battle. One way that some people address that issue is they bring a cold air supply, if you can do it, to your furnace, so the furnace is breathing outside air. It's a little bit more expensive because you're heating cold air, but at least you're not circulating your shop air throughout your house. But if you are, obviously the simple answer is, try to open the window, seal off the space. And I'm just going to give you a little caution here. My son's electric dryer broke. He said, "Oh, Dad, the dryer's not working." I said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" I went on YouTube. I saw a guy. And sure enough, he saw a guy that told him how to take apart the dryer, and he found a big bobby pin in there, and he fixed it. I want to caution everybody listening or viewing, some of the videos on YouTube that have to do with finishing are not accurate.
No.
Well, Ben, I don't want to shock you.
Oh, come on.
But there are some folks out there who are well-meaning, I think, in general, who don't necessarily have all the answers. And if you Google or YouTube a homemade spray booth, you will see a huge number of videos out there of people who have created various contraptions for their basements or their garages, usually using 2x4s and plastic. So a couple of cautions. If you make a homemade enclosure out of something, with say 3 sides and a roof, if you use an ordinary box fan, the danger is that the fan can cause a spark.
Yeah.
And the fumes of what you're using could explode, and that would be a really bad thing. Particularly linseed oil, rags are flammable, lacquer fumes are flammable, alcohol, methanol fumes are flammable. So the correct answer is an explosion-proof fan, totally enclosed fan. Those are expensive. So if you're going to do a fan, you got to think seriously about whether or not that fan is a safe enough fan to use and whether or not it's going to move enough CFM to actually do you any good. And here's the reality. In order to really effectively vent those fumes out, you've got to move the volume of air in that room, say 4 or 5 times in the course of an hour. You got to move a huge amount of air. I mean, you need tremendous airflow. The other thing you'll see on some of these systems is they've incorporated a little filter pack, usually with activated charcoal. So you can buy activated charcoal at the aquarium supply store. Okay, it's extremely effective in trapping the particles that make it smell bad. So you could make yourself a little pack. My friend Don Williams from the Smithsonian used to make these things up with a piece of old hose, like dryer hose, and a little fan and a bunch of charcoal and some filter media. And for a small project that you're using with an airbrush or a spray can or something, okay, it would help trap some of that stuff. Then you get that box with the filter and the charcoal out of the house as soon as you use it, and it will help capture some of the stuff. But remember, what smells bad is actually a particle. Till you capture those particles and do something with them, they're going to be in the house. So once you create that smell, they're actually particles of what you're smelling, are little teeny tiny particles. So you got to capture them or blow them out, one or the other. So a little activated charcoal pack can be very effective. And if you go on, I think there's a couple of people on YouTube that are showing those. I have some friends in the business that do on-site touch-up in like a commercial office where somebody's got a, scratch.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure, yeah.
They've got these little it's called a scrubber. You can look for that on YouTube, a little portable scrubber. So you could do on a small scale, you could do something to help capture those fumes. In a big shop, we've got a big booth with big filter media and a ginormous fan. So you're moving a huge amount of air. You're trapping a tremendous amount of the particulate, and you're going to take that filter media out and get rid of it when it gets full, because that's where the smell resides. So I guess the answer to your question is, it's a tough situation. And as Ben said, one of the options is in the wintertime, just use your shellac as a wash coat or a beginning coat. You'll get your project where it needs to be. And if you want to add your polyurethane later, great, put it on when the weather gets better.
Yeah.
But it's really a tough situation. And if you are going to work in a relatively unheated space, we talked about this the last time, make sure that your product, what you're using, is warm. Yep. Hopefully at least 5 or 10 degrees warmer than ambient air. So if you're working in a 60-degree garage, take that can of polyurethane and stick it in a bucket of warm water until it gets up to, till you warm to your touch. And make sure the piece that you're spraying or brushing is warm.
You can't just get the air warmed up and, with a, Yeah, that one really spoke to me last time.
Well, it helps. I mean, it absolutely helps. I mean, cold is not the friend of these finishes. They're formulated to work, ideal temperature range is 70 degrees.
Yeah.
And, a relatively modest amount of humidity. You don't want to be doing it at 80 or 90% humidity.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, we certainly did beat up a pretty good hour here, my friend.
Wow, man, we killed it. Let's see. Yeah, that's all of them. All of them. So normally we squeak a segment in there or a recommendation or something like that.
Isn't this the part where you buy the pizza?
No, that's Bob's buying the pizza.
Oh,
next
come
time,
on,
man. And we have good pizza here too.
Okay.
Can you even get pizza in upstate New York?
No, we don't have any pizza here.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Well, hopefully I'm going to see you next week, and maybe we'll do some pizza.
No, we're seeing you Friday, right?
I hope so.
The day that this is released. Yes. All right. So, so be on the lookout for Colonial Williamsburg working wood in the 18th century.
Thank you.
Virtually.
Yep.
That sentence wouldn't make any sense to people working wood in the 18th century.
If anybody's listening that has signed up for working wood in the 18th century, if you have not checked your emails, the dates have been pushed back by a week.
Yeah.
So make sure you look at your emails from CW and don't tune in at the wrong time, because they had some reasons to have to move the dates around a little bit. So a couple of the featured speakers will be Chris Schwartz, Bob Van Dyke, and even I get to sneak in a little bit on with Bob.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
It'll be fun.
I'll be there sticking a camera in your face.
We're great.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Shop Talk Live. Thank you, Mike, for doing this with us.
And it's always a pleasure. I hope to see you next week, and maybe we'll do this another day.
Absolutely. If you have any questions you'd like us to answer on the show, send them into shoptalk@taunton.com. If you're watching on YouTube, click that thumbs up button. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thank you for listening.
If you love this podcast, you'll love Fine Woodworking Unlimited. Access more than 40 years of articles, how-to videos, and project plans designed to take your craft to the next level. Check it out.
All right, so this is like stupid old person question.
Oh.
This is a podcast, right?